Good morning. Thanks for being here. Let me welcome you to the first of a series of validation exercises on a roadmap for low-carbon transport. Let me indicate that the Cabinet of the Government of Dominica approved of a feasibility for this low-carbon transport. And part of this feasibility that the Cabinet has approved requires that when a national roadmap to lead us to low-carbon transport is developed, that a series of validation exercises take place with the public and then get the feedback and then send this back to the government. Government ultimately decides what way we go. But this is part of the validation exercise. So I want to welcome to you for the very first one. We may come back again, given what the attendance look like, and have another one here and do more outreach. But this is just the beginning, and I want to thank all of you who are here, thank the media, and thank all those who are participating and those who are online. We want you to continue with us in this exercise because this is a very timely a moment for considering low-carbon transport. I think in the morning we heard on the news a bus driver was talking about the kind of increasing cost because of gasoline prices and the impact on the bus drivers, on their business, the impact on local individuals who have to suffer this increased cost. It is extremely timely that the government has in fact approved this study to look at low-carbon transport, so we can look at electric vehicles using our abundant geothermal and solar resources to power transportation and remove transportation from gasoline. Okay, so I want to welcome you with those on that. Unfortunately, if you look at the agenda, P.S. Gloria Joseph would have been here, but she has been assigned to represent the ministry by the OECS Commission, and that came up recently. So she sends her regards and her blessings on the event. Hopefully, she will most likely join us in the next event, which is taking place in Portsmouth tomorrow, same time at the Credit Union. And then we move to Layu and then Grand Bay, and we may also include some other locations in maybe Margaret, Wesley, and so forth. We really want to get comprehensive national stakeholder input into a national low-carbon transport transformation and feed that exercise to the government so that they can have the right information, the right public sentiment, and make the right decision. I have to my right Ms. Verena from Grota Consulting. Grota Consulting have been engaged with the Ministry of Planning, Economic Development, Climate Resilience, Sustainable Development, and Renewable Energy in implementing the feasibility. Grota Consulting has significant experience throughout the world in low-carbon transport, both on the design side and the finance side, in Latin America, in Asia, and also have played a very key function in the Green Climate Fund in terms of supporting and reviewing national low-carbon transport projects. So she's managing the project, and she will do a presentation. We also have a presentation by Dr. Greta virtually on that. And we have Mr. Emil Lancelot, the Chief Technical Officer in the Ministry of Public Works and Digital Economy, also to give remarks. So I just want to say this is the broad context of why we are here. The consultant started for some time now. When did it start exactly, Verena? Almost a year ago, when we did, if Mr. Winston here, we did quite a bit of data gathering We had public surveys, we had meetings with bus associations and so forth, and to get the surveys from people and the response on what they would like to see. This heavy documentation that we gathered from across sectors, the various transportation modalities, fed back into the reports that we have. It fed back into the draft national roadmap for low carbon transport, and also into a phase one for what is being proposed for feedback, a phase one. So we do a phase one rollout of low carbon transport, get some experience, information, set up the infrastructure, and then we go to real massive, and it's from 2023 to 25, and that will be presented by both Dr. Grota and Verena. And then we look at 2025 to 2030, I think, and from 2030 onward. So it's something as transformative as this requires learning, requires thought, and in a phased manner that you, as you implement, you learn, and so forth. So with this, I will call on Mr. Emil Lancelot to give some remarks.
Mr. Michael Savre, Green Climate Fund National Program Coordinator, Ms. Verena of Grota Consulting, workshop participants, members of the media, good morning. Over the last decade, Dominica has been impacted by a number of major climatic events, most notably Tropical Storm Erika and Hurricane Maria. The Ministry of Public Works and the Digital Economy's response has been to build back better. We took note of the Honorable Prime Minister's declaration to the world that Dominica intends to become the world's first climate resilient country. As a ministry responsible for roads and land-based transportation, we have sought to increase the resilience of our road network by building more robust structures, improving drainage, and introducing additional resilience through redundancy. However, we recognize that increased infrastructure resilience is not the only effort to be made in combating climate change. Even though as a small island developing state, we emit only a minuscule amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we must play our part in reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. There are a few things that we can do in this effort, which the Low Carbon Transport Program seeks to accomplish. One such initiative is to reduce the need for driving. This can be accomplished by improving pedestrian facilities and comfort, improving public transportation systems, and decentralizing services. Through the ministry's work towards growing our digital economy, we have seen and will continue to see an increase in business being conducted digitally, thereby reducing the need to travel to transact, a new normal forced upon the world by the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, we need to transition from our present mode of transportation to the use of zero-emission vehicles and phase out the use of fossil fuels in our energy sector. The Rosso Enhancement project is one of our projects through which we hope to facilitate some of these objectives. During stakeholder consultations for this project, ideas to make Rosso a smart city have been forwarded. Also, the possibility of including in our scope of works the installation of charging pedestals to facilitate e-mobility is being considered. So we have taken on board the goals set out in this project as part of our infrastructural development, and we hope to continue to do so in future projects. I can assure you that the Ministry of Public Works and the digital economy is on board with these goals set out by the National Low Carbon Transport Program, and will work collaboratively with all stakeholders to ensure its success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very critical and important partner in this exercise. And now, moving swiftly, we call on the arena to make a presentation on some of the findings of the field group.
Mr. Savran and the Ministry here of Public Works as well, and the media and all of you participants. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to be back here in Dominica and present the work that we've been doing for almost a year already. I myself work for Greater Consulting for over 5 years. I've been working with the transport sector for over 10 years, and I'm from Costa Rica, which is not that different from Dominica when it comes to many aspects regarding the protection of nature, regarding the mountains too, and the rugged terrain, everything. So we have slightly more inhabitants. We have 5 million, and I'm used to working in cities. So for me, working here in Dominica was also a big learning experience, because I had to really think in another way. Many people live in rural areas and move differently, so to grasp actually how people move around here was one of the first bigger challenges here for me personally, but I'm very satisfied with what we have achieved. So I see, okay, we're almost there, hopefully, with the presentation. I'll just get started. So this consultancy was on behalf of the Green Climate Fund, and we did a whole series of documents. The first one was the transport diagnostic, which was actually the biggest one. Then we made some other documents like the mitigation options document. We also did a gender report, which was mainly based on the existing literature. We didn't gather any new data on that. And based on that, we elaborated the low emission transport roadmap. And based on that, we did some other reports regarding financing and pre-feasibilities for some of the options. Right now, we're at a stage where we are going to ask for a simplified approval process, probably from the Green Climate Fund, in order to implement this first phase of the low emission carbon program. Okay, so I don't know if that's the next slide, but we'll see about that. So I'm just going to start with how we did with the transport diagnostic. This is, I think I have like 50 minutes of presentation, so it's a bit of a long presentation. I hope I don't get too technical. If I say something that you don't understand, just ask. And I'm gonna try not to stay too long on the transport diagnostic because it's a lot of figure, and then actually go to the interesting part, which is where we're going to and what we're actually planning on doing in the short term and the medium term and the long term. So just as Mr. Savran said, transport diagnostic was, first of all, a lot of data gathering, right? But before we started gathering the data, I had to do a big analysis of the existing literature. There's quite a few literature here. I had to do a lot of reading, so by the time we got to the first national consultation, which was in October, which was an online event, I had already read the communication to the UNFCCC, I had read the climate resilience strategy, I had read the Dominica climate goals, and then I also read some impacts on health and climate change, and what I did read too, which I think every consultant should read regardless of what he's working at, it was actually the post-disaster needs assessment after Hurricane Maria. That gave me a picture of what a small island like this has to deal with in terms of infrastructure after such a big hurricane hits. So that was really, really helpful. As Mr. Eugene pointed out, we want to build back better, and so it's important to analyze the whole infrastructure part as well. So after this whole reading I did, I came up with a pretty good country context regarding how much we are emitting, how much emissions are actually from the energy sector, and most of the emissions, that's no surprise, come from the energy sector. You use gasoline and diesel not only for your transport sector, but also a lot for the electricity sector, having a great potential of renewables. So that is something, if you want to achieve your climate goals and if you want to become more resilient, it is a key to start doing that in the energy sector as well as the transport sector, not only for the climate, but also for your wallet. Diesel is extremely expensive right now, gasoline too, and it's very variable. People don't know if it's going to go up. It will go up. And with the geothermal resources that you have a steady source of energy and a way of actually reducing your your bill, and by that also the greenhouse gases and local pollutants. Okay, how's the presentation coming up? Because now I need to show some graphs, right? I have it on my laptop too. If you have a stick, you can. All right, I'll just continue with the things I know by heart. Sorry, I cannot show you the graphs. So after this whole research that we did, we figured there's not a lot of. Okay, no. First, then afterwards, we looked into the climate goals and policies. We see that Dominica has ambitious policies in reducing its greenhouse gases. I think the number was they want to reduce 17% of the transport-related emissions by 2030. I know that they're revising the national contribution. Maybe it's going to be more ambitious. We don't know that yet. But as far as I know, that was the state of the art. And but how will we reduce those emissions in the transport sector? So there wasn't that much information for the transport sector. So we had to do a lot of work to actually gather that data in the first place. So that's where we had Mr. Winston coming in, and he had to call plenty of institutions asking for information, and then also doing the household mobility survey as well. And one of the things that was actually hard, well, if we think about transportation, the first thing we think about is probably infrastructure, streets. How are the streets here in Dominica? There was a map about the roads, and they're actually in a quite good state as far as I'm concerned. And then we wanted to know about how many vehicles there were, and that one was a tricky one, right? Because when we asked the Internal Revenue Division, for example, they said there were like 40,000 vehicles in Dominica, and I was like, well, that's hardly possible, right? What happens is that people have vehicles and they register them in the Internal Revenue Division, and then when they don't use them anymore, you have seen plenty of derailed vehicles or unused vehicles by the sides of the roads, and they don't get taken out of the registry. So that's like a data gap there that it's not only here, it happens in Costa Rica as well and many other countries. That's something that needs to be worked upon in many countries because it's not consistent. We don't need to know how many vehicles there are, we need to know how many vehicles are driving. So we went to the Central Statistics Office, and there we had the number of actual licensed vehicles, the vehicles that pay the license every year. So we got a figure of how many vehicles there are in Dominica, and the number was around 18,000, and between 18,000 and 20,000. And that's a lot for a country with 72,000 people. It's like 257 vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants, and that's plenty. If the median in Latin America is around 200. Okay. No, but like I'm running out of I only know so much. Yeah. in order to make sure that the electricity price goes down. And we gotta get a few cars going so people see them, right? So people see that the cars drive around, that they don't get stuck, that they get everywhere, that they get up the hill, up to Trafalgar Falls. And we want to get electric minibuses too, because the minibuses are important. They're the ones that are actually transporting the most people. And we need to train people. What happens if my car breaks down? What happens if the battery doesn't work anymore? How do I get rid of my battery? We don't want to create a solution and then create another problem. If we don't have people certified to actually handle the batteries, we're gonna end up being a trash can for older electric vehicles of other countries. So those policies and those capacities need to be put in place, that you have a proper management of the batteries and of the vehicles themselves, because I've seen that there are a lot of derailed vehicles anyway, so there needs to be some program for the whole scrapping, etc. But batteries are, I mean, they're sort of dangerous, so you need to handle them with care, and their capacities need to be there too. We're looking into V2G. What is that? Vehicle to grid. This is pretty innovative too. We're thinking of having chargers at critical facilities such as hospitals. So if there is a power outage due to a hurricane or whatever, some of the bigger vehicles such as coasters can come in and plug in there and supply the hospital with electricity in case that there isn't any. So that's a resilient measure right there too. We are looking into the business model, we're looking into monitoring how good the vehicles are doing, and then obviously the outreach, which is what we're doing right now. That's phase 1 in summary. We defined where we're going to have the charging stations. Those are the charging stations we propose around the island. We are thinking solar panels on the Windsor Stadium and others on the airport and the port, where you can charge your vehicle with fully renewable energy. That's the whole detail. We have a whole report on charging station as well. Should you have any more questions on that, we can dig into that deeper, but we're just going to continue. After we have the initial vehicles, we're looking for a full deployment of passenger cars and minibuses, and we're going to start introducing also trucks. Trucks are not available right now, well they are, but they're very expensive, so hopefully in a couple of years they will be more accessible and we can get them here. By then, hopefully the geothermal plant will be working as well, so we can plug in the vehicles to the grid and have a lower energy price too. And by the year 2030, that's a policy measure. The island can commit to stop importing fossil fuel vehicles. That doesn't mean that fossil fuel vehicles won't be running around the island anymore. There's going to be a second-hand market, and if I bought like a Jeep that runs on diesel in the year 2029, they're not going to tell me stop using it. No, you're still going to use it until it phases out, right? But the import of fossil fuel vehicles should be banned from the year 2030. Other countries are already doing that as well. Next. And then we look into the electric boats. Boats aren't as mature. The technology isn't as mature as the cars. So here we're looking into pilots. These are outboard engines, also with the solar. Well, the ones in the pictures have a solar rooftop there, so the battery charges while the boat is out in the open sea. We're thinking about co-financing 10 electric boats that can be used in the water. We also, the idea is to actually get people involved there, and then in the next phase having more boats there as well. And based on that, based on all the options that we evaluated, thinking, okay, which one could be applicable, which one we leave out, we elaborated our low emission transport roadmap, and these are the whole areas that we are focusing on: pedestrianization, public transport quality, electrification of road transport, battery electric boats, and that's all the components will have a big accessibility and gender component, that if we're working in the public transport, for example, that the buses are accessible for people with disabilities, for the elderly, etc., and that are also safe for women and children. So those are like the cross-cutting issues that cannot be left aside, and obviously will be accompanied with a stakeholder engagement too. So this is the first part, the first line of action, and I don't know how much time I still have, but okay, I'll just go through with it. Pedestrianization, we're looking into Rosso for the first phase, and then we're looking into the other towns to start having better pedestrian infrastructure. You already have some I saw some small parts like John Street, which is fully pedestrianized with tables right by the harbor, I saw. So the idea is to have more of these streets fully pedestrianized, or at least have the sidewalks widened, have have some parking facilities right outside. We also have parking policies put in place. People will have to get used to paying for parking. I know that's not very attractive, but that's one way to get people stop using the car. And because it's not always about incentives. You have always like push mechanisms and pull mechanisms. So if you start charging for parking, people will start using their car less, or the money is put up to some good use to have some nicer cities. And by the year 2030, we're thinking that the central district of Rosso, the business district, might be fully pedestrianized. It's a small town, people can walk. Obviously, there will be cars that will be able to go inside the city center, like for emergencies or people with disabilities, etc. But the idea is that we have some parking facilities outside, or people just come with the bus and don't have to use their car anyway, and they just walk around Rosso. And I know sometimes it's hard to implement these measures, but at the end you're going to have a car-free city, less pollution, better health, better life quality, and so that's one of the measures, the first measures we are looking into. We can discuss this afterwards with the whole actions that we have there. If you think there's some actions missing or some of the actions are ridiculous, we can discuss that afterwards. Next. Here, this one's important, like the public transport quality. So this one was tricky, right? Because we know that how public transport works here and how it has always worked. There's only so much you can do. Like all the people, most of the people come to Rosso, and but in many cases, it takes them a long time to actually get out of the town they want to get out of. Like what I saw from the surveys was that if somebody took the bus from Portsmouth to Rosso, it took them like 20 minutes to only get out of Portsmouth and then all the way to Rosso. So it has advantages, because some people like to run an errand while they're on the bus, but other people just want to get to work quickly. So there's a lot of potential of improving that, and not necessarily changing everything. So we were thinking, okay, the smartphone penetration here is fairly high. I don't have the numbers, but it is high. So we're thinking about a public transport app where you can have on-time information of when the bus is coming, where, and so at least you know that the bus is coming. You don't have to wait so long. And then you know where you're getting off at. You have other better public bus stops, and then in the end, it will. On the next step, we're thinking of an on-demand public transportation app. Maybe I think that's the next one. And that is basically that I can call for a minibus. I don't know if somebody knows Uber in other countries. I can call for a minibus with my public phone, and then it picks me up, and then it picks somebody else up, and so it's more optimized. We get more people on the bus, and you have less waiting times. and you have more security because you know who the one is, what the driver's name is, what the bus is like, etc. You have grievance mechanism. If you have a complaint, you know where to complain to, and so that public transportation app, we think, is a good measure to improve the quality of the public transport. And then the zero emissions fleet by 2040. I think I already went into detail with that, about the electric buses and vehicles. These are the whole activities that we're looking into. Implement charging infrastructure, training of personnel, capacity building, training and maintenance of chargers, and the whole battery disposal. Sorry? Point by point? Shall I read it out?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Then I'll read it out. So what we want to do with the pilot phase, we want to have 20 minibuses up and running, 50 cars, and those will be not only passenger cars, we're going to have some pickup trucks, some vans. Most of them are going to be passenger cars, though. Pickups, we had the discussion with Mr. Savran here a couple of days earlier. Although they're very attractive, there aren't very many deals on the market by now, and the ones that are on the market are really expensive, so we're thinking not too ambitious with the pickups, but that's something that can be discussed as well. We're going to have a public charging infrastructure, including fast chargers, and we're going to have some solar panels for the fast chargers. That will ensure to deliver 100% renewable energy for the 70 electric vehicles that we'll be having. Then there are some policies, for example, providing 6 months of free charging at charging station, and thereafter a coverage of a subsidized fee, meaning you won't be paying for the electricity the price that you're paying for your electricity at home, at least for the first couple of 5 or 6 years. That's something that needs to be decided upon too. We want to, I know that there's a tax reduction for electric vehicles. The value-added tax is reduced, it's eliminated, and also the customs tax. We want to lower the excise tax as well if possible, and remove the environmental surcharge of 1%, even though I'm not sure if it's removed already, for a period of 5 years. We want to have this measure to be fiscally neutral, right? I know that the government depends on vehicle taxes, so how are we going to do that? When reducing taxes on EVs, we want to add a surcharge of taxes for polluting vehicles. So if you want to import a 1991 old Dodge Ram, you can do that, but you will be paying a surplus of charge, and that will make up for the subsidy that we're giving to the EVs. Then we're going to do some training, maintenance and repair, and the whole battery disposal strategy. Yes, that's for the first phase. And the next phase? In the next phase, we're looking into the fuel deployment of EVs. We're thinking we're going to have by 2025, hopefully 1,300 up to 6,000 EVs. With those policies, I think that can be made. How we're going to do that, I think that part will also be targeted afterwards. In the presentation by Jörg, which is going to talk a little bit about the financing options. But the idea is to have concessional finance for the vehicles, so people will be able to get them at a very low financial cost. Okay, and this one we figured out with the ecological tax, right, from the cruise ships. So we see, when I was here in February, there was a cruise ship here every day, and but they don't stay overnight. They just get out. They do maybe a tour. Maybe they'll have a cafe. And we were thinking, listen, I mean, they get to enjoy this beautiful island, but then they go back to the cruise ship and they eat and have lunch and dinner at the cruise ship anyway. So let's charge them for like a fee per passenger, We were thinking $3, but that's up to discussion. And that will go into a fund that will actually aid, for example, the bus drivers to get an electric vehicle. Okay, so they would get like if they want to get an electric minibus, then they could get a subsidy that comes from this charge of the cruise ship passengers, and it would have a reduced price too of the bus. So I think that's a pretty good measure, right? Then what else? Okay, then we would expand the charging infrastructure too, and more EVs would be purchased, and we would be introducing some heavy-duty and light-duty electric vehicles as well. And by 2030, we have the ban of the importation of fossil fuels. What are the benefits? Obviously, a reduction of GHG emissions, reduction of local pollutants, reduction of noise. That one's important too. And you know that the one with the noise, that's actually pretty good too, because there are electric waste collection vehicles, and they're very popular in many cities because they don't make any noise at all, so they can operate them during the night. So that's something to look into as well. We have savings because in the end we're gonna end up paying more for the total cost of ownership of the EVs, and we have improved climate resilience due to the thing that I explained with the vehicle plugging into a critical facility and power the hospital, for example, and we reduce the dependence on fuel imports. Then we have the zero-emission boats. To initiate it, we have a co-finance of 10 electric boats of different sizes. Afterwards, we will have a bigger deployment of boats for shore sites, and 2030 onwards, we would be looking into bigger boats as well. Right now, the technology is not very much available for bigger boats. I know I was asked to look into the schooners, for example. We had a more detailed look into the ferries, and we analyzed the option of converting one of the ferries to methanol. But right now, there's uncertainty regarding the methanol prices and the supply of the methanol. So I think that's something that will come up in the medium term or the long term. And it's important to look into boats because you have such beautiful marine life here that needs to be preserved. And it's not only the pollutants from the boats that damage it, but also the noise. Think of all the fishes and lobsters and everything you have here. So going with electric boats is really a good measure to preserve the whole marine treasures that you have around the island. And tourists will be grateful for that too. Okay. Gender and accessibility. As I said before, we had a small gender report which was based on literature, existing literature. We need to collect some data, some real data about gender issues in public transportation. I talked to the Bureau of Gender Affairs. She said that they haven't done a survey of women using public transport, but that there have been reports, for example, of schoolgirls presenting some issues, some safety issues with drivers or with harassment, especially in buses. Since I don't have any data on that, I didn't state it. But there needs to be a survey regarding safety and harassment and campaigns and awareness of, especially when it comes to safety and, let's say, like safety and annoyance, because maybe women don't feel unsafe, but maybe they just feel annoyed when they get talked to or improperly or stuff like that. So that is something that really needs to be assessed as well. And accessibility too. Right now, if somebody, I don't know how they do it, but if somebody has like a wheelchair or something, it's not very accessible. So the buses that we're going to purchase, they should have all a ramp, maybe not all of them, but at least making sure that if you have some kind of disability that you will be able to use public transport without any assistance of anybody else. So you still are independent. Next, I think that's it, right? Oh, stakeholder engagement. This is basically what we're doing. This is key really for the success of the whole project. I was telling the interviewee before that I think that transportation is it's like soccer or like cricket. Everybody knows about it. Everybody suffers it. Everybody thinks they have a better solution for it, right? Because everybody moves around. So for me, it's very important that all of you showed up here and that we can have hopefully a very rich discussion about this, because transport is something that moves everybody around, and it's shifting constantly. There's so much new technology, there are so many new options, and I can come here and come with something really techy, high-tech, and innovative, and you're gonna be like, well, but I like my minibus the way it is, right? So we want to do this, we want to have something tailor-made for the island, and I hope that with this roadmap we achieve that, and I hope that that we have a good discussion afterwards, and it will be an even better roadmap afterwards. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll be going now. So how is this? How are you going to fund this thing? How are you going to pay this? So next we're going to have Dr. Crotter present on. So try to get him up. Is virtually on how we fund the first phase, and that's very important. So I thought it was very useful. A number of things that you saw in your presentations are recommendations. We're not saying that's what we are recommendations, subject to feedback from the public, and then these recommendations again are forwarded to the government, and the final decision will be made by the government. So a number of the recommendations with regards to, for example, the tax on the cruise passengers who use electric buses to allow get a fund so the bus drivers can in fact purchase an electric vehicle. It's a recommendation. Recommendation, how do you, very important matter is the CC3, the Caribbean entity through CARICOM that does energy and renewable energy, have indicated that 10% of all revenue of the governments in the CARICOM come from taxes on vehicles. So if you're going to move towards an EV, there has to be a sensibility on, okay, if you move in EV, how do you offset it? Right? I thought Verena proposed something that, as you increase the EVs, government revenue drops, but then you increase it on the fossil fuel vehicles as they're being imported, so to offset the government revenue loss. And then, of course, this does happen to be permanent. Once a number of vehicles pass a threshold, you can then revert back or whatever, revert back to what it was. But at least the policy has to have the sensibility of the importance of government revenue for taxation from the importation. There is, how are we, Greta, is he on? I'm sorry, I'm sorry? But you need to have his presentation on as well, right? So let him just get on, please, and so we can move on. busy and it is you pull here and there, it makes it very difficult. But thank you for your presence, PS. Dr. Grata is going to do a presentation looking at the financing for the first phase we mentioned. The first phase, about $10 million application to the Green Climate Fund and for the first phase, and then we'll look at subsequent phases. So we go to Dr. Grata, who's put you on.
most popular standard is the Vera standard, or the voluntary carbon standard. There are also standards like the gold standard. Formerly there were also the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, which continues working. Is structured, it's not used anymore, except for overall. So what does offsets mean? We quantify and register emission reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions. Thereafter, you make a project document which you register at the standard, and then annually or biannually monitor emission reductions. You make a monitoring report which is externally verified, and then you can issue greenhouse gas offsets or voluntary carbon offsets, which you can sell on the market. There are persons and as well as institutions which purchase such offsets to reduce their carbon balance. Now, the price paid for such offsets are in a range currently of between $4 and $10. It depends very much on the type of project and the storyline. Okay, I'll try one more time. If it doesn't work and the communications do not go, Verena will make the presentation. Certificates, ITMOs, and the Green Climate Fund. There are, of course, many other climate finance options like the Green Environment Facility or climate technology funds or funds from private institutions also. But the three basic ones we have been looking at, which can be used to make the projects financially more attractive. Climate finance doesn't mean that this is grant finance. It doesn't mean that you get everything for free. It means that the investments are financially more attractive. So we go to the next slide, which is offsets as title. Offsets are basically the sale of certified emission reduction. Certified means it's based on a standard like the voluntary carbon standard or the Vera standard, which is the largest standard worldwide. Can also be a standard like the gold standard. There are different, there's also North American trade agreement standard. So there are different types of standards depending where you want to sell thereafter. But by far the largest is Vera. It's also currently the one which is paying best with a price between $4 and $10. It depends very much on the project and the storyline and what the buyer is willing to pay. So there is nothing like a fixed price per ton CO2. This is a price range which you can get. How it works is that you have to register a project at the standard, and then that is externally validated, that project, and then you monitor the emission reductions, you measure them actually, how much electric vehicles are driving, what's their distance driven, how much electricity they consume, and how much a fossil vehicle would consume petrol or diesel, and what emissions it would have. Based on that, you make a monitoring report, which again is externally verified, and then the standard issues you the voluntary carbon offsets. And these you sell to the buyer. So the standard contracts is that you get paid upon delivery. It's a payment for a service you are doing. The service is reducing CO2, but you're paid ex post after having invested and after having driven the vehicles. So you invest, for example, in the year 2022 in an electric bus. You drive it in the year 2023. You make the monitoring report in the year 2024 about the emission reductions of 2023, and then you get the certified emission reductions, you sell them, and then you get the money. So you don't get it in 2022 when you purchase the vehicle, you don't get it in 2023 when you operate the vehicle, you get it in the year 2024. Now that won't pay for the vehicle, it's like an icing on the cake, it gives you an extra money, which makes it more attractive, but the transaction costs are relatively high, and the number of vehicles to be changed in Dominica are relatively small, which make it difficult for this market to actually happen. So we don't think that the Dominica situation is very apt for carbon offsets. We go to the next slide, which is ITMOs. ITMOs is the abbreviation for Internationally Transferred Mitigation Outcomes. A rather cumbersome name, but it's under the Paris Agreement, stating that one country, like Dominica, can sell to another country, like Switzerland, the emission reductions which go beyond the nationally agreed targets. The nationally agreed targets are fixed in the documents provided to the UNFCCC, the nationally determined contributions. So you can't sell what you agreed upon reducing. Dominica and Switzerland have closed or signed an intention to make such an agreement between the two countries, so that ITMOs could be sold from Dominica to Switzerland. Also, this system, similar to the offsets, has the same structure. You actually measure the reductions. You make initially projections, but you're not paid based on projections. You're paid based on actual emission reductions. That's why it's also an ex-post payment system. The difference to offsets is basically that you can get a higher price. Discussions with Switzerland are in the order of $40 per ton CO2, which makes it much more attractive than the offset market, and it's easier in the term of the validation verification reports, which means you have lower transaction costs. So the project is still quite small, and it's not sure if CLIC actually wants to realize a purchase agreement for such a small project. In general, their projects are 5 to 10 times larger. So you need to do basically two things. There needs to be an agreement between the two governments. This should be able to be realized in this year. And the second, the buyer actually needs to be willing to purchase the emission reductions. That's what we're discussing currently with the buyer as well as with the government. So this would be an additional finance which is helpful to cover a part of the operational costs. And then we go to the last slide, which is with the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund finances projects and programs which either mitigate greenhouse gases or adapt and increase the resilience of a country to climate effects. Now, this would be basically a mitigation project, but it would also have resilience impacts, as you would have decentralized renewable electricity production, which increases the resilience towards hurricanes, for example, when the grid breaks down. And it also increases the resilience for usage of V2G, which is vehicle to grid chargers, which means that The batteries of the electric vehicles could be used with their electricity stored to reinsert electricity into the grid in case, for example, you have a local grid breakdown. Now, with the Green Climate Fund, the possibility is that you receive upfront payment. The financial instruments used by the Green Climate Fund are multiple. It is equity, mezzanine funding, loans, guarantees, grants. What we are looking at is basically a blending of loans and grants. Loans are negotiated between the client, in this case the government of Dominica, and the GCF, depending on the type of project. But they have a low interest rate. The rates are anywhere between 0% and 0.75% per annum. They have a long tenure, between 20 and 40 years, and a long grace period between 5 and 10 years. However, these numbers are not fixed anymore. They are variable depending on the type of project. We also have service fees, disbursement fees, which come on top. What does this allow to do? It allows to have low-cost finance. Now, the final client will, of course, not get the interest rate of 0.75%, as you have a financial intermediary, for example, the National Bank, which thereafter lends it on to the final client. So you'll get perhaps an interest rate of something between 3 and 4%, but you get a longer tenor. What we are formulating currently is what you call a simplified approval process project, which is easier to formulate for small projects. It's a $10 million project for the GCF we are formulating, which would allow for phase 1 to finance partially with loans and partially with grants the different activities. For example, the charges could be financed potentially with grants. A small share of the vehicles which go to the public sector or to buses could be grant financed, and the rest loan financed. So this is a relatively attractive financial option also because it allows to pre-finance the activities, and this will be followed up, and we will, in coordination with the government, formulate for this program, for the pilot phase, a Green Climate Finance or Green Climate Fund project out of this. So these are basically the options you're having. After phase 1, the idea is basically that you have regulatory instruments in place, which are economic instruments, which make the EVs much more attractive compared to internal combustion engines, and therefore that the market forces play without having a financial loss of the government or more of the private sector. But you will still use ITMOs for the second phase, but you will not use the Green Climate Fund anymore for the second phase of the program. So that's basically what a short summary on climate finance and what shall be used for this program. If there are any questions, happy to respond then.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brother. I thought that was good. I'm wondering, should we take the questions? Any questions directly from the presentation? Yeah, yes. Well.
Good day. Just want to inquire, the GCF, is it specifically for individuals, or will there be some sort of availability for companies and so?
He says he can't hear anything.
Just pass it down.
You want to send him an audio note?
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, what was the question?
GCF, is it specifically for individuals, or is it geared towards individuals, companies, needs? What is the intention of it?
He's asking if the GCF is specifically for individuals or companies, or if it's a mix.
The GCF only finances so-called accredited entities. These are, for example, multilateral development banks or other financial institutions. They can be national financial institutions, development organizations like UNDP or GIZ, and there are also national institutions, but they do not finance directly. They finance through other entities, and these other entities need to be accredited at the GCF. So it's never a direct finance to a client or to an enterprise. It always goes through other financial or development entities.
Yeah, so, but to the question, yes, GCF is for everyone. It could be for public, private, doesn't really good, yeah, for the entire, what he's saying, that the funds must go for, in this case, we're thinking of the private development bank. Yeah, thanks. Any other question? No? Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's it. He doesn't hear, right?
No. So shall I tell him to log off?
Yeah.
Okay.
The first question? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so we'll have some light refreshments. We're going to have a brief break for the refreshments. They're going to come back and have some detailed questionings about what you've seen, what's left, what recommendations from you as to what should be included, and we can move forward. So break for some light refreshments and come back in 10 minutes.